Hello and welcome to Set Talks, the podcast that helps you navigate and connect with the Denver film scene. I'm Nick Fiorella, your host, and with me today is Matt Hinderman. Matt is a multi-platform producer for the city and county of Denver. Hey Matt, how are you doing, man?
I'm doing well, Nick. Thanks for having me.
No worries. Thank you so much for doing this.
Of course.
I really appreciate it. I'm excited to chat with you about your job and what you do in video and the history and all that.
Yeah.
How's your week going?
Week's going good. I'm actually ahead of schedule with my current projects and assignments. That's always a good feeling. So I'm starting to plan next month and get that ball rolling. So, once you get ahead, you try to stay ahead.
All right, cool, man. Well, to dive into this, why don't we just talk about how did you get into video production and, tell us about your experience from the start of your career to now.
Yeah. So I'd say I had a somewhat unconventional step into video production. So I guess to go all the way back, I've always been into sports, watched sports growing up, played every sport depending on the season. And in high school, I was cut from the basketball team. I wanted to stay around sports though. So I joined the newspaper, the student newspaper, just so I could write about the basketball team and continued that. I was like, okay, it was fine. It was good enough. And you don't see a lot of sports jobs other than the people you see on TV. And so I was like, okay, let's go for that. So I got to college, wanted to be a on-air, sportscaster, weekend news guy. Big goal was ESPN. And pretty quickly you realize that there's a lot more jobs than just on camera. Thank goodness, because I was awful at being on camera, especially as a nervous, twitchy 19-year-old. So, I just started picking things up behind. I guess I didn't learn it fast enough because I graduated still trying to be on camera and just completely struck out from every job I applied for. About a year after I graduated, I got lucky. The NBA was hiring just video loggers, just people that come in, log basketball games. That's all they do. All right. The lady that does their hiring went to the same college as me. Basically gave me a chance purely because of that. So I moved from Oklahoma to New Jersey, basically the next month. And from there, that's when I started picking stuff up. So they would always tell us if there's an edit bay open, go learn. I had very little. I actually learned how to edit tape to tape in college. So I picked up digital editing or nonlinear editing at the NBA, just with whoever would show me what certain buttons do. 2 years at the NBA. The Oklahoma City Thunder moved from Seattle to Oklahoma City, and it was a great opportunity to move back. They were kind of building their video production team a little bit. I had some video archive background that I could spin into a job, and so I was able to get hired there. And again, same thing. If there was a shoot that nobody was willing to go on, I would do it. There have been many disasters along the way. There was a shoot I just did not know what the iris did and just shot it completely dark the entire time. It's completely unusable. But yeah, just over the years, I was at the Thunder for 10 years, picked up things, from video production, podcasting even, produced an entire weekly show at one point, actually for several years. And then I moved out to Colorado to work for the soccer team, the Colorado Rapids. Did that for about 18 months and then was able to get the job I have now at the city. And yeah, along the way, I've been able to pick up enough skills and experience to convince people to keep hiring me. So yeah, I'm super happy with where I'm at now, and yeah, just continuing to learn, honestly, every single day.
That's awesome. So I would imagine sports is pretty run and gun.
Yes.
Is it all I'm sure they do sizzle reels for the game and that sort of thing, but is a lot of it kind of run and gun and then piecing something together to be used basically in the next 10 minutes kind of thing?
Yeah, I'd say run and gun is exactly. So even our community events, we're run and gun. A player would show up at a school at 2:00. You would get your interviews, you'd get your B-roll, you'd get back to the office by 3:15, 3:30, and you'd have to have that video out for the website or for social media by 5:15, 5:30. So you're, cutting a full 90-second, 2-minute video in 2 hours, and, and you've got ingest time and picking music and graphics. There's a lot that goes into that, and so that was kind of my specialty. And even now when I have to do stuff like that for the Nugs parade, I was able to turn around a 3-minute recap of the parade in a single day. And, I was like, oh, that's my wheelhouse. That's that's how I was raised. So that was a piece of cake. So it's very different now where I go shoot something and I might not touch that for a week because, I've got month-long production timelines. But yeah, so highlights, it's funny when I was at the Thunder, so much evolved. Social media was coming about. Nobody the team didn't have a Twitter account when I started, and now it's millions and millions of followers. And so I was on the ground as we were figuring that out. I started a thing. I got it from NFL Films. They do a cut down of football games in 30 minutes. They just take out all the dead space and you just watch the plays. It's like, why don't we do that? So we cut a game down to 3 minutes, and that was my job every single game night, was to get that out before. The goal was people can commute home and then watch that highlight reel on their phone or on their computer or whatever by the time they got home or the next morning. But that was what I did for many years. And then it evolved, and now it's much more sizzle, much more hype. The talent that is in the sports world today is humbling. It is way beyond what I can do or could do then.
No, that's amazing. What a crash course to get you up to speed on all this stuff. Yeah. And also like deadlines. I feel like, some people get too caught up, I think, in things being like absolutely perfect. And, a harsh deadline, I think is a good thing to have, just to kind of.
Yeah, and that's honestly something I struggle with probably now in my current role, is deadlines are a little softer, or at least a little bit longer term. And so, I'm used to just, or like staying up all night. There have been nights where I did pull a 26-hour shift one time when we were in the playoffs, and I had a few different projects working. And so I was up from 8 a.m. until 10 a.m. the next morning getting things done. I was able to finally take a nap. So yes, a lot of like late mornings or late nights. But yeah, those deadlines kind of just force you to get stuff done. They're kind of a blessing and a curse. So yeah, it's
Sure.
interesting.
Totally. Well, let's get into your current role. So, where do you work? What is your role? What kind of videos do you and your team produce? That sort of thing.
Yeah. So as you mentioned, I work for the city and county of Denver, so it's government job. So I have a team. I want to say, so there's a variety of people that do a variety of different things. So if anybody's listening, I don't want you to feel left out. But specifically, like what I think of as our primary role is a show called Elevating Denver. And the way I describe it when I'm pitching it to people is it's just a show of good stories, good people, things, happenings going on in Denver. And it's our job to highlight those, promote those. And it's a really good chance to just show things that are happening in Denver that maybe people don't know about, that they can take advantage of, or just to feel better about living here. It's an awesome city to live in. And, I feel super lucky that I get the chance to inform residents, but also tell those good stories too. So that's my primary function, is 2-ish features a month that go on Elevating Denver. They're about 5-minute features. So a little bit long form. I kind of consider like medium form, but these days it's probably like long form. And we also support other agencies as well. So, when the mayor, all the elections were happening, we made, how to vote. We wanted to inform the residents as much as possible. So where can you find information on how to vote, if you speak Spanish, how to vote if you have other needs that maybe aren't as common. And so we're creating a lot of content along those lines. And then social media stuff too. So we just had a survey, I guess, done, a kind of an audit of our content. And, you can't inform people if they're not subscribed to you. And so that's the other aspect, is we've got to create entertaining enough content that people want to keep coming back, and you don't just get muted or unfollowed. So we also started a Instagram series called 5 Things, and it's just, 5 whatevers in the city. 5 ice cream shops was my personal favorite, because I got to just try great ice cream around the city. In 3 in one afternoon was probably not the best idea. But yeah, so that's the kind of variety of stuff we do. The mayor does messaging, bi-weekly. He'll come into our studio, we'll shoot him on a green screen, and then we'll distribute that back to his press team. And they can distribute it to whoever they need to. So, and the most practical one is, if you tune into like Denver 8 TV, we do council meetings. So if you're, watching city council on Monday nights, that's our team that produces that. And there's committee meetings all throughout the week too. So the audit committee on Thursday, and safety and business Wednesday, all sorts of committees. So we're doing that as well, directing, producing. We've got studio and remote cameras similar to what we've got in this studio as well. So right. We do a lot of different stuff day in, day out.
How many people are on your team? So it's you and...
So as far as like the video producers, I think this is where I started going, then I tangented it. But
No,
so
you're good.
it's me and two other video producers that are creating these features, and then our boss kind of reviews, sends them back, and gets that going. And then other people do help and contribute too. So we've got a live stream producer, but he has shooting skills as well, and he edits a show called The Gavel, which is like a recap of those committees. Let's see, we've got tons of engineering help. We've got people that are more focused on the directing of that meeting. We've got some contract help as well. I think it's the contract or part-time something. And then when I walked in, I saw Anthony, who I'm going on a shoot with next week about a firefighter here in Denver. And so, he kind of splits his time. So it's kind of a hodgepodge of different roles and things. But obviously we've got a social media team as well, like a website team, I think a technical focused team, different things. So it's quite a few people, I guess, like in the department itself might be over like 25-ish. So I'm probably leaving people out, but
Wow.
yeah, it's a pretty big team. So it can kind of get more narrow as you zoom in, I guess.
That's awesome. That's awesome. You mentioned elevating Denver and kind of that it's these human interest stories. So we do have some clips. Let's take a look at one now, and then we'll talk about it afterwards.
Just, the idea that we have our stories and things that mean to us, and how do we translate them in a way that they become relevant and important to other people? Because it's not the story itself, it's the way we tell it.
She was in fighting metal, stinking of stale cigarette smoke and expensive perfume, enthusiastically applied. Bub, his acne-filled face resembling peanut brittle, was the repellent young live-in boy toy who worked for Mrs. Harley. She was in her late 50s, and there was a 25-year age difference between them.
And I think our discussion that we're having now is to the point. It's why am I writing and what am I writing?
I've heard from many people in my lifetime that I have a lot of stories to tell about the privilege of growing up here in Park Hill. And the fact that the memoir class was here at Park Hill Library really prompted me to add it to my schedule, and I'm delighted I did.
That was very interesting, just the whole setup of it, and as well as just the emotion that was captured and whatnot. Can you elaborate on the clip we just saw? What is like Park Hill Memoirs, and just tell us a little bit more about that.
Yeah, so I when I was pretty new in this job. So it was last December, I think, I started this project, and I didn't have a lot of contacts. I didn't know how to source these stories. I just knew I liked the library, and so I just like randomly connected with a person from Denver Public Library, and wove my way to eventually this group. And it was really interesting because this group started just as like during COVID, even, as just a memoir writing class for older active adults. They could just, if they were interested in writing, if they had no experience, if they had some experience, they could just come and take memoir lessons. But after the class ended, they decided to keep it going. And I thought that was really interesting, is how just a casual class connection can turn into some really strong friendships. And I was able to go to 2 or 3 other classes, observe them interacting, and then a couple of them volunteered. Many of them did not, but a couple of them were brave enough to read their memoirs that they wrote for the class on camera. And it was really exciting because one of the people, Tilly, just the whole class, she would just kind of come in and, she would participate in class, but she was just really soft-spoken and wasn't trying to like lead the conversation by any means. And even my like email interactions with her were a little subdued. So when she gets in that chair and everything's lit, we finally get the mic on her, and I tell her, ready when you are. And she just explodes into life of this story that she wrote. She just like became this character. It was shocking. I had a coworker of mine, Shane, with me, and I think we both just looked at each other, and we also kind of smiled because it was like, this is gold. She's so good. And then when I sent it to my boss, Gary, for review, he was like, I need more Tilly. There needs to be more Tilly in this video. And so, we had so much good stuff. It's one of the downsides is like being kind of limited to that 5 minutes is there was a lot of stuff. One person that volunteered to read didn't even make it in because there just wasn't enough time. You have to kind of pick and choose what goes in. And yeah, it was just really interesting. And the teacher was great. And yeah, I was really happy with how that came out. But again, there's not a lot of like B-roll of a memoir writing class other than just people writing. And so I had to think of a different way, especially with these stories that are, I guess, memoirs. So they're nonfiction, but how are you going to cover that? How are you going to cover cuts? And so I came up with the text on screen and learned how to do that. Just did a few After Effects tutorials and then built all of that and converted it into Premiere. And I was pretty happy with how it turned out. It was a long process. It was probably one of the most hours I've spent on one of these videos, but I think it was worth it to learn a new skill and to do that video.
No, that's awesome. I was going to ask you about those two things. It's like when she was kind of getting emotional, it's like, you guys must have been just off camera like, oh my God, this is like powerful,
Yeah.
Which I feel like you'd be on pins and needles at that moment. And then, yes, I love the text and how you incorporated that into it just based on the, what it was all about. And I thought it was a cool artistic choice.
Thank you. Yeah, when I thought, in the memoir class, I try to make these subtle connections. It looked like handwriting. So theoretically, It could have been their handwriting as they're writing these memories they have onto paper, but you're visually seeing it and hoping, maybe people connect. Maybe it just keeps people around a little longer. You're competing with so much, those attention spans. So everything we do, we try to figure out a way to connect better with people. And yeah, I hope it turned out pretty well. It was insanely time consuming. So basically you had to make a point at every curve of every letter. And then you just had to, I don't remember the exact process, but then, you had to animate each letter individually and time it so that it came on to match the voice.
Right.
So yeah, it was really challenging. But again, I had the time. It's one of the things I love about this job. I had the time. My boss was supportive. I was like, I think I can do this, but it's going to take forever. And he was like, what else you got going on? Good point. So yeah, it just took me a few days, learned it. And the downside was when I would get feedback and he was like, take this part out, but include this part. I'm like, well, I have to create new text for that part. But yeah, I was really happy with how it turned out. And then yeah, when you're watching somebody on camera get emotional, there's like a few things going through your mind. Like one, you're just psyched because it's good. Two, you're like empathizing because you feel that emotion from them. And three, you're like stressing that you're capturing it right. Like, I hope my focus is right and my iris is good and everything. You're worried about all of that stuff in that moment. So there's a few things going through your head at that point. But yeah, it's interesting.
That's awesome.
Yeah,
that's cool that you have that flexibility too, where they kind of let you take some artistic control over it to make it engaging and cool.
Yeah.
So we have another clip, which this actually is kind of centered around Halloween. So let's take a look at this clip and then we'll talk more about it. Perfect.
So if Sloan had a bad experience during Halloween, it'd be pretty sad. For her to not have fun for something that we have so much fun with, that would be really hard to see and deal with, but we're also kind of used to having the expectation of things might go bad. You don't like that you got content?
Halloween is one of those holidays that is very much anticipated by children. Parents are having their children carry blue pumpkins to signify that they are autistic or neurodiverse. What we see in children with autism often are challenges with social communication and sensory processing. And what that may look like is you might see a child covering their ears or their eyes or, kind of cowering or maybe even running away. And with that, we want to make sure that the child first and foremost feels safe and helping them really adapt to their environment and vice versa, adapting their environment to their needs.
So the blue pumpkins, and then this little girl Sloan, she's a 5-year-old and she has autism. And this, tell us about the concept of the blue pumpkins and how did that come about, and what went into creating this spot.
Yeah, well, I kind of mentioned with the memoir thing is I was pretty raw with connections and finding stories, and so one of my strategies was just look at like national months, and I think October is National Autism Awareness Month, and I just think that's an issue that could use more awareness. And so it's I reached out to a nonprofit here in town. They connected me with somebody who connected, again, it's this like game of telephone, and eventually I got connected with Sloane's mom, Kimberly, and they were thrilled. They liked telling their story because they want others who are going through similar situations to be able to have more information, to feel like they're not alone. I think one of the biggest challenges is when you have a child with special needs is you just feel very isolated until you find that community. And so that was the other part of it, is like making sure people felt like they were part of that community. And the family was great, super welcoming, welcomed me into their home and let me shoot, whatever they wanted to. And, Sloane threw a few tantrums while I was filming. She didn't want to carry the pumpkin anymore. She didn't want to put on shoes to go for a walk, and I asked, I was like, can I include, almost stopped shooting because, it's a private thing. Like when my kids throw in a tantrum, I'm not like looking for attention. But I was like, this is kind of what it's about. Other parents are going to see this and recognize this. And so I kept rolling, and I figured I could ask her about it later. And when I said, do you mind if this is included? She was like, absolutely not. You need to include that because that's what people will see. Those are the challenges. If you just see her happy the whole time, people are going to be like, well, how hard is it really? But, you see those tantrums and the problems. And, I think the whole point of it is kind of 2 points. Is like if somebody sees a blue pumpkin, not to be judgmental if the kid can't say trick or treat, or if they're not wearing a costume at all, or if they don't have shoes on or their hair done, whatever. Don't, just give them the time. They want to experience it in whatever way they feel most comfortable. And then for people that are in the community, maybe they don't support the blue pumpkins or not necessarily support it, but maybe they're not wanting to identify themselves in that way. And that's totally fine too. Just understand that there is a community out there, and there's other people going through similar things, and hopefully just feel like there's a way to experience these traditional holidays that maybe are a little bit different. Just experience them in different ways, if that makes sense. So
absolutely, yeah. I'll have to, if I get the information from you, maybe if there's like somewhere, like a website or somewhere people could go to, I could include that in the description of this.
Sure, yeah, that'd be great. I'm actually, I reconnected with the mom because, it's October again. And so we're doing, and our social media strategies have changed, and we're going to less audio-based Instagram videos and more text-centered. So, she sent me some updated pictures of Sloane, and I'm re-editing a little bit of it from last year, just letting people know again, by the way, we did this video last year. Here's what blue pumpkins mean. Just give them more time and more grace. By the way, Sloane is thinking about being a butterfly this year,
Nice.
Just something, because I think people really connected with her. It's like, she's a cute kid. She's super funny. So I think, and that's kind of like, it would have been easy to just interview the people, like a scientist, I don't know, scientist, but, people that could just talk about it generally. And so one of my goals is always show people that are living that kind of life. That's a better way to connect with people than just doing interviews with experts on the topic. So that's always a goal too.
No, absolutely. That's, I feel like you captured that really well in the video, is just sort of the day in the life of it and whatnot. So yeah, great job. I loved it.
Thank you.
I thought it was cool. All right. So we have our last clip. This is, another, elevating Denver piece called A Golden Legacy. So we'll take a look at this clip and then we'll talk more about it.
All right.
He was quite an athlete throughout his school career. At the University of Denver, he was considered the one-man track team. In the 3rd grade, they had field day. He was running and jumping and doing well. And his 3rd grade teacher told him, Jerome, if you keep running and jumping like that, one day you'll go to the Olympics.
This is Helsinki, Finland, modern capital of an ancient people, and 1952 host to the greatest of all athletic competitions, the Olympic Games.
USA:n Biffle hyppää 3. hyppynsä. Tulos 7.57, voitto ja kultamitalisuoritus.
I knew he won the gold medal again, but I didn't know, I took it for granted. I didn't recognize as a child what that meant.
I mean, another one that is, I guess, more dives into some of the history of Denver, which I thought was really cool. And I just loved how you kind of, how the story was told through the interviews of, what was his name again? Jeremy.
Oh, Jerome.
Or I'm sorry.
Yeah, Jerome Biffle.
Not Jeremy. Jerome Biffle, thank you. The first gold medalist of Denver for the long jump.
Yes.
Yeah. I loved how you kind of told it through the interviews of his family and whatnot, and you could see in the emotions, what it meant to them. So yeah, tell us more about that spot. How did that come about? What was the shoot like?
Yeah, again, it was Black History Month last February, and I was just kind of searching through notable Black Denverites, and his dad was actually, I think, the first Black fire chief in Denver, and as I was like doing research of this one, just more and more interesting stuff. So the basic overview is 1952 Olympics, I think, in Finland. He won the gold medal. Came back to very little fanfare in Denver. His family threw him a little parade on the street they lived on, So that was the first striking thing to me, is how different it is to the Olympics now. There's no Wheaties boxes that he was on or anything like that. No, publicity likeness things.
Sure.
He ended up going into public education as a counselor for 30 years, worked at Denver East. And, if you talk to Terry Gentry, who's at History Colorado, thousands of kids were influenced by him and his wife, who worked at Manual, and inspired and encouraged to go to college to make their lives better than they thought it could be when they were growing up. And that was what I thought was really interesting, because I think not to make athletes into a monolith today, but the way athletes are so worshipped today, a gold medalist maybe doesn't have to come back and work in a school. It's maybe a different, maybe they're doing events for school kids, but anyway, it's just, that's how striking it was to me. I thought it was really different to think about the historical aspects, but then that he would just dedicate his life, and that he came from such a impactful family too. His dad coming as one of the first Black fire chiefs, or if not the first, and a lot of stuff that didn't make it in the piece was how interwoven Jerome's life was to other people. And the way I kind of started building in his mind is he was like one link in a chain link fence of uplifting Black citizens of Denver. And you kind of see that continued with some of the people he impacted today. And so what I'd love to do is go back and tell more of that story and show, I would love to talk more about his wife. She was really impactful, his dad, and there were cousins, and there was just all sorts of really influential people around him that I'm sure, inspired him as well. So it was kind of this back and forth giving and taking. And I don't know, I think there's a lot more to tell, but yeah, hearing from his family, his granddaughter, I think, lives in the house that he bought after he got back from the Olympics, probably not with the Olympics money or anything, but yeah, it was really interesting to hear that from his family. And so it's always something I've wanted to tell more depth with and figure out a way to bring that to life. And also his jump it was 37.5 feet, which is insane. There's a plaque at Denver East, and it was it starts here and it goes all the way down there, and I cannot imagine a human jumping that far. It was wild. So that by itself was really cool.
No, that's awesome. Yeah, you could definitely do a whole, at least a half-hour piece, I'm sure. And so just to kind of, the format, I mean, it's 5 minutes. That's usually what you're aiming for, around that?
Yeah, okay. Pretty much. We have some flexibility, though, too, because, a lot of stuff goes online, so it's usually things land between 5 and 6. We have a 30-minute show, and again, that's pretty loose, but we do 5 or 6 5-minute features each month through my team.
Nice. Okay. Well, can you, let's talk about the filming process for these human interest stories. So, getting into the equipment and stuff. So can you talk about the cameras you use? What's the typical setup look like? How many cameras, lights, audio?
Yeah, so I kind of got into a routine. We have 2 Sony A9s. We just got an FX3, which is really nice. But again, it's not identical to the A9s, and so we kind of have to pick and choose when you're mixing it in. But yeah, typically my style would be the primary shot right next to me who's doing the interview is kind of the medium to tight. You kind of want to get their face but show some context too. And then I'll put the secondary camera off to the side. But, so if the primary camera is here, if anybody's just listening, it's just off my right shoulder. And then the other camera 3 or 4 feet to that right, or I'll flip the whole setup to the left, So I kind of keep that 180 rule. It's not golden rule. I'm the one, it just kind of helps me. The more rules I have, the less like decisions I have to make. It's really the truth. And then with lights, that's something I've been trying to work on. And again, going back, like I have taught myself pretty much all of this. And so I'm still figuring it out. So if anybody's listening to this, do not take this as gospel. Do your own thing or start here and improve it. But typically I'll do, kind of your main key light and then a little bit of a fill and then a little bit of a backlight. Just again, a lot of what we have to do is we're shooting in really tight spaces or unique spaces that I haven't scouted before. I don't know what the setup's going to be, or it changes last minute. So a lot of it is just figuring it out and just hoping for the best. And I feel like there have been some that haven't turned out as great as I've loved, but others turn out really well. And, I'm just trying to get better at filmmaking every single day.
Absolutely. I'm with you on that. I'm learning every day, and I'm always looking up tutorials and, that sort of thing. So I was going to ask, like, you do the interviews.
Yeah.
Do you do all of them?
Yeah.
Like,
So typically
cool.
I'm out by myself.
Oh, really?
Luckily, like my team is really generous with their time as well. And so I've had help on a handful of shoots, but they're all busy too. And so most of the time I'm out there by myself. I'll set up both cameras. I'll set up all the lights. I'll mic them up. And then I'll kind of just position one of the cameras where I can see that it's still recording and see that it's still in frame. And then I'll ask the questions. And so you're doing everything, and it's a lot. It's like mentally exhausting, because I think by the time you're done with a shoot, it could be 11 a.m., but you're brain drained. And it's challenging in that regard, but it's also, really fulfilling too. Like when you come back and like, you always have that panic as you're ingesting, like, was everything out of focus? Was it blown out? And then it looks good. You're like, yes, all right.
Oh yeah, totally. No, I've done shoots like that where I've set up 2 cameras and I'm hitting record and you're doing the interview, and that can be a lot. And it's like you got to really be on because you're monitoring all of these. It's controlled chaos usually on these shoots. I feel like. Yeah, and then you're just drained at the end of it because you're thinking and thinking. And then it's always nice to go back and watch it, and it's like hopefully it all worked out, and stuff like that.
Yeah, when it turns out your imposter syndrome just kind of like goes back into the closet for a few days.
Totally. Can you talk about, like, do you have a process for, like, you capture the interviews and then you get B-roll coverage? What does that look like typically?
Again, it depends a lot. We're really often at the mercy of our subjects and the locations. And so I try to be, it's really hard to narrow people down, or just to like get everybody that is featured has been generous with their time. And I look at that as a gift. They are allowing me to come into their workplaces or their homes sometimes, and they're giving me their time. So I try to be as like professional as possible, but also as quick and efficient as possible. And they would rather do X, Y, and Z. That's fine with me. I would rather do ABC, but I will work with their schedule. And so it kind of depends. Typically, if they say I'm in charge, I will do interviews, then B-roll. And because I want to make sure, like, the interviews are the heart and soul of the story, and the B-roll I can always, make work if I have to, or come back a second day if I have to. But yeah, that's typically my order of how I do things.
You try to do the interview first.
Try to do the interview first, because the interview always takes longer than I expect. Every time I'll tell people it'll be 45 minutes, like 15 minutes of setup, 15 minutes interview, 15 minutes of tear down, and I'm there for 2 hours every time. So I need to get better about like projecting that time. But yeah, it always takes longer than I expect, because people say interesting things. People have interesting stories, and you want to ask about that. And before you know it, you're like 30 minutes into an interview for a 5-minute story, and it's interview 1 of 4. So yeah, it gets dangerous.
Oh, cool. All right. So can you touch on just, because this podcast is meant to be learning. As we said, we're always learning every day.
Yeah.
Do you have like a most difficult shoot, maybe without naming names and just discussing the circumstances, like if the microphone kept cutting out, or you forgot batteries and you had to run back and forth, which I think I've probably made every mistake possible in order for me to remember it.
Yeah.
So yeah, do you have like a particular shoot that stands out that was a little rough, and maybe hopefully it worked out in the end, but it was a hard shoot?
Yeah, I think, trying to like figure out which one would be a teaching moment. There's plenty. I think, like, to your point, you have to make a mistake to make sure it never happens again. And so I think I'm at the point boy, knock on wood, that I've made all the big mistakes. And so, you know, at this point, like I mentioned, one of my first shoots when I was with the Thunder is I went to a player was at a school, and just I did not know how to ISO up on the camera I had. Everything was just shot like the lights were off, and it was brutal. It was unusable, so it was not salvageable. And you know, I think working in sports there's always challenges. Players say, you know, maybe this is why I like taking so long for interviews, is because I've never had that luxury before. You would say, oh, okay, you get this player for 10 minutes, and then the PR guy's pulling him out after 2, and you're like, cool, got his name.
Yeah.
I would say the most recent one is I did a feature on Denver Walls, which was a mural festival, and I was interviewing the Rhino executive director, and I don't know, like I did an interview with the exact same equipment right before. Everything was great. But then I don't know if it was the way she was sitting or if it was the way the cord of the microphone, but it just kept like crunching as she was talking. And you know, and this is a problem I've had a lot of times, is like stopping an interview to fix something. Is a lot of times I'll just wish it away, and then you get back and you wish you would just stop the interview. So that's something I did well this time, is I stopped the interview like 4 times to try to fix it. We moved the lapel to the other side and just never really fixed it. But I was able, again, because it was like a 25-minute interview, I was able to pull enough of the parts where her audio wasn't kind of crunchy and grainy that it worked still, and I just used the other interview more. But yeah, that was a frustrating thing, and I still don't know what happened exactly, but it's just your equipment just lets you down sometimes.
No, I've had that happen, where it's like the audio keeps cutting out. But in one case, I had it kind of keep coming back on. So I didn't say anything right away, thinking like maybe it'll fix itself, you know? And is there enough here to work with? And then I eventually had to like stop and like switch channels and like try to figure it out or move the interview, because it was on a construction site and there was a lot of metal and whatnot. But that's always rough. And if you don't have the audio, you might as well not have the video.
Honestly, it's like when we say we're video producers, it's kind of a misnomer, because like the video is secondary. If you've ever messed up audio, you can fix video, you can get more video, but you can never go back for that interview. So, well, I guess maybe you can, but yeah, audio is the most important thing.
Sure. Well, can you, let's talk about your editing process. What does that workflow look like for you? You know, how do you organize the footage and to tell the best story possible with what was captured? I don't know if you have a process for how you go about that.
Yeah, I guess so. It's probably not like super strict, but you know, I like getting my interviews. So again, I'll shoot 2 cameras, so I'll sync up the audio or the 2 video angles. And then I'll start with the person who's going to be kind of the main subject of the story. And, you know, I know a lot of people go through and kind of log their footage, but I don't really. I don't know if I'm more impatient. Maybe it's like the fast deadline training is I'll pull the first thing that sounds good and I'll move it. So I'll start that on an interview timeline. And then I'll have like an actual edit timeline. So I'll pull it, drop it in the other timeline. And basically what I'm doing is, this is kind of my logging process, is I'll just go through their whole interview, pulling every soundbite I think works, that I might want to use in this story, and I'll slowly kind of rearrange it. If I'm like, you know, this soundbite actually would be a great one to lead, I'll just drop it in front. It might get moved, but that's just where it's going to go for now. So it's just like slowly kind of getting the puzzle pieces in order, and I'll do that with pretty much all the interviews to an extent. So like I'm doing a story now, I'm actually in the process of editing it, where it was going to be heavily like, you know, so I mic'd up the interactions. And that's the other thing, is if I could have audio from non-interview sounds, I try to use that as much as possible. So like in the showing instead of telling. So it was about the CSU Spur. They have an equine therapy program, and they had a client riding the horse, and I was able to mic up the occupational therapist working with him. And, you know, there was a lot of interaction between the two of them. And so that was really the primary focus for me. It's like, I want to lead with that, and I want to dribble that in throughout the whole story. So I went through that, and I found, 8 or 10 good moments of interaction between them, and basically had that on my timeline as well. And then the B-roll becomes really like tertiary at that point, where you're just like filling in what makes sense. And at that point, if you've got the story belt, you're kind of golden, Totally. The thing I'm working on now is trying to like adjust pacing, because a lot of times with 5-minute videos, it's a lot of 15 to 25 second interview clips. It can get, no matter what the topic is, it can get a little dull and repetitive. So trying to figure out ways to like jazz it up a little bit. a little hard with certain topics, but yeah, so if somebody listening has input or feedback, again, always learning. How do you spice up a 5-minute video, 90 seconds in? I don't know. I'm working on it.
No, I'm with you. I have a similar process where I'm always thinking about what's going to be a good hook, and I'll move that to the beginning. And then, basically like organizing the topics into sections and then hacking that down into a flow that works and stuff.
Yeah, exactly. And like off the top, you're like you mentioned the hook. We've gotten feedback and studies that have been done, like starting with faces is, typically you start, I would always start with like a building shot to show you where you are. People don't resonate with buildings. People resonate with people. So start with a face. I think the Blue Pumpkins started with Sloane turning towards the camera and you see her face. You know who it's going to be about. So, or even if you're going to repeat something later, the most interesting 5-second sound bites, start with that. Even if you come back to it later, even if it's a little out of place, start with that, because if you don't hook people, they're not going to get your message anyway. So totally, it doesn't matter if it's not necessarily like linear. So
sure.
Still playing around with that.
No, I'm with you on that. I've definitely done that where I find a good sound bite and start with that. But I'm also guilty of like starting with the drone shot, sure, yeah. or whatever it is. Yeah. Cool. All right. Well, where can people watch these videos, and what social media channels should people follow for this stuff? Yeah,
I think the City and County of Denver has a YouTube page. That's where a lot of this footage lands, as far as our Elevating Denver stuff. If you watch Denver 8, if you just channel 8, like over the air, I guess is how it's still. I haven't had cable in a long time, but I think that's where it is. And then all the social media channels, Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, is City and County of Denver, and give us a follow. And yeah, you'll see our stuff there, and hopefully, give us some likes and some views. I appreciate it.
Totally. Well, I wanted to toss this question in there just to kind of see, what makes Denver such a cool city for these kinds of stories, in your opinion, since you've done a number of these now? And I don't know if there's a common thread that is a takeaway from having these experiences producing these.
Yeah, that's a good question. You should have led with that. Should have been the hook. That should have been off the top. Man, I think so. I've only lived in Denver 3-ish years now, and I love it. I've always, like, my older brothers lived out here for a long time, so I'd always visit, once a year or so. And I've always liked it just because of the mountains and the weather and the sports teams. Especially coming from Oklahoma, we didn't have any professional teams until the Thunder came. And so, I've always liked it for just being a cool big city. But now that I've been in here a while, I love it feels like we're all in it together a little bit. There's a lot of support. There's a lot of just like reaching out in all directions. And, I kind of led with what we do is we just tell the stories of good things happening in and around Denver. And there's just a lot to tell because there's a lot of good people doing good things, whether it's an artist or a muralist or people running a cafe to help people that maybe are down on their luck, or government services that people maybe don't know about. So I've done several of those stories, and there's just a lot of positivity. And I try to, be a positive person, and I am super grateful for the opportunity to just put that positivity back into the world. And obviously we're not getting the views of the Denver Nuggets or things like that, but the views have never been like my driving concern either. I'm just super thrilled to be able to tell good stories, and whatever little drops of positivity or making people's day, even if it's just the people I'm interacting with, is what I'm super grateful for. And I think, like, I've only been doing this job a little over a year, but there's endless amounts of stories to cover. So each year, I'm excited to see what else is out there, meet new people, and explore new parts of the city that I don't know about yet.
Yeah, totally. All right. So just to wrap up more on the video side of things, do you have any words of advice for someone listening that's trying to get into video? Because there's all capacities of video jobs out there. Yeah. Do you have any advice for somebody looking to get into video production as an industry?
Yeah, I think it's a great question because, like you said, or like I said earlier, is I didn't know what other video jobs were out there except for being on camera. It's just what you see, right? There's so much out there. And so what I would say, the two pieces of advice I've kind of typically given people, whether it's an intern or somebody looking to get in the industry, is just do stuff. Do whatever and just suck at it until you don't suck at it as much. That's the best way to learn anything. And I think that's the biggest hesitation for people is they're just fearful of failing. And like with video production, there is no such thing as failure, because with every failure, you're learning something. We've all just bombed shoots. We've all just made terrible, like when I look back at past contents, cringy. So just do stuff. You'll hate it later, but you'll be glad, you'll be better for it. That's the first thing. The second thing is just network. And people hate networking, I think, traditionally, but I would say network your way. And the way, so like the advice I've given people is like, I'm a pretty sports oriented person. So when I was at the NBA, I didn't go to like luncheons or things like that, but I joined the softball team. And I met 3 different editors who then taught me different things and then eventually introduced me to other people, and it snowballed into a job eventually. And so that was my way of networking, was just joining the softball team and playing right field and hitting a few dingers. And that's, I think you can network any way you see fit. And so, it's going to feel awkward at first, always being the new person to a group or to whatever. But coming down to DCM and meeting the people here and doing a podcast is a great way to do and network. And those are the 2 biggest things. There's a lot of other advice, but I think if you can start with that, you will be much more successful than if you don't.
Awesome. Great way to end it. Thank you so much, Matt. Well, and yeah, thank you so much for coming on the show. I really appreciate it. This is great talking to you, and can't wait to, keep watching more of Elevating Denver spots. Thank you guys for tuning in. This is Set Talks, the podcast that helps you navigate and connect with the Denver film scene.